Okay, by my clock, it is now 1:15. Let's go ahead and start today's session. Welcome to the March 11th session of our class. If we are disconnected for more than 10 minutes or so, please check on Canvas later today for the information that we would have gone over during this particular session. All right, so let's go ahead and start. So at this time, let's do our attendance check-in. At this time, please type present for your attendance in chat. If you did not sign in with your full name, be sure to include it in the message. And thank you. I'll try to remind myself a little bit later to ask for people who may join us after the start of the session to check in with us. Okay, I think that I have most folks there. Okay, let's move on then. As we've done throughout this semester, we want to review the things that we have discussed previously. I believe last class we went over the exam items that needed some clarification. Then we went into our lecture. Now we're going to look at the last session that we conducted earlier this week by going over several of the key terms. So we began the chapter on the discussion of sensation and perception. So in that part one of that discussion, we talked about such things as what is sensation. Sensation is us, organisms, getting information from our environment, stimuli in our environment, and then using our sensory receptors located throughout our body to bring in that very needed information. And then what do we do with it after that? Well, that's where perception comes in. So the information from our sensory receptors will somehow eventually get to our brain. And it's going to be there where we process that information to understand what it is that we are seeing, what it is that we're smelling, what it is that we feel. So that's the process. Sensation, getting information from the environment, sensing it, and perception, making sense of that sensory data that has been provided to us. Now, we also reviewed two processes, top-down versus bottom-up. Top-down processing is where we use our experience and our education, high-level modes of thinking in order to determine what it is that we are seeing. So they may guide our perception via top-down processing. Whereas with bottom-up processing, we're just looking at the element or whatever's in front of us at its component parts, and we're building up the case as to what it is to come to perception. But it is something of a process where we're not using higher mental processes like expectation or anything like that. It is what it is. Remember the example we did during the last class where I showed you an item that could be either a B or a 13. If I didn't show you anything but that item, you would have to guess. You have to build up in your mind the elements, go through bottom-up processing, try to figure out what the perception is. But if I gave you, like I did in the last class, 12, the item, and then 14, it would look like a 13 to you. You would perceive it that way because of your experience as well as expectations. So top-down versus bottom-up processing. Then we talked about how it is that we take the energy out in our environment, the stimuli out in our environment, and turn it into something that we can actually use. Well, that's what transduction is, taking various forms of stimulus energy and transforming it into a neural impulse. And again, the neural impulse, what we talked about primarily in chapter 2, is the way that our brain works. So they're converting this stimulus energy into a form of energy that we can work with our brain. Then we went over the idea of thresholds. And again, a threshold, generally speaking, is going to be when an organism, such as our cells, is able to detect that something is there at least half the time. We looked at absolute thresholds, so being able to detect the presence of something being there half the time or not makes it the absolute threshold. The difference threshold, when we're looking at, for example, two stimuli, like say two light sources, and we want to be able to say when those two light sources are different. Well, the just difference threshold depends on the Weber's law because they have to be a different percentage of one stimuli to the other for us to be able to notice that the two sources are different at least, again, half the time. We then discuss subliminal. And subliminal are all those types of stimuli that fall beneath our level of awareness. So those items that does not get to the level of absolute threshold, everything underneath that is subliminal. Now, the research out there shows us is that we can detect, but yet not necessarily be consciously aware of many things. And for a time there, people were really concerned about subliminal messages or subliminal persuasion, meaning that they wanted some sort of idea to be able to communicate with you and your conscious not being aware of that. So obviously that does open up a great deal of possibilities when it comes to things like advertisements. And we did review a few examples and samples of subliminal advertisements that have been around for a while, as well as some forms of subliminal graffiti as well. But again, we shouldn't be too concerned about subliminals because the impact of subliminals are very weak and not very enduring. So they don't last a long time, even though they may sway us to a certain degree, but they are not that powerful. And then we review the other influences on perception, such as sensory adaptation. When something has been in our presence for some time, that may cause a certain degree of annoyance in us, and sooner or later we will adapt to it, meaning it no longer provides us with any relevant information anymore. And when that occurs, we may simply push it to the side. It's no longer novel, it's no longer important to us. And so until something else changes, we don't really focus on it anymore. We adapt to it. We also reviewed the idea that context can change how we perceive things. What you've just read in the short story, and then you see some sort of ambiguous image, that ambiguous image could be influenced by the short story you just read. Okay, so we can see that the context can have an impact. And we also learned as well that emotion as well as motivation can have some influences on what it is that we actually do perceive. Then we went and discussed primary sensory systems. We started off with vision. With vision, we looked at the electromagnetic waves, which are light. We looked at how they have certain characteristics. We then looked at the structure of vision, which is the eyeball, and the structures of the eye. And then we also examined the retina, where we have our specialized sensory receptors. Okay, all of this together allows us to take stimulus energy from the environment going through the eye to the retina at the back, where we have rods and cones, which are specialized sensory receptor cells for vision, to become excited, cause a neural impulse to be initiated, which then travels back up from the retina through an optic nerve and then out the eye. That is the way it sort of works for us. And we also noted that that structure where we have the optic nerve leaving the eyeball also represents our blind spot, because the retina cannot produce rods and cones at that place where the optic nerve exits the eye. Then we talked about color vision, about how we see color vision working. We have the trichromatic theory, okay, which basically states that we have different types of cones. And remember, cones are the ones who have the ability to see color. They like to work in high light, so there needs to be a sufficient light for them to work. And they have very accurate vision, unlike the rods, which like dimmer light, and they're not so clear when it comes to their vision. Okay, so that was one of the ideas, that we have these various cones of color, okay, and these cones of color detect the various electromagnetic waves out in the environment, and that's how we have color. We also talked about why it is that some people may be colorblind. They may have an issue, for example, with producing red or green cones. If that's the case, they will be colorblind. That means they cannot see certain types of things the same way someone who has all their colored cones working. And then we talked about the opponent process theories, and also after images, which is sort of an example of the opponent process theory. The idea is that we have these colors sort of associated with one another. As one is really active, it suppresses the other. Okay, and then when you remove the stimulus that got that particular cone active, then the other ones will sort of express itself, and that's what after images are. And then finally, we looked at visual perceptual organization, looking at the idea of Gestalt, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We see in this idea of perceptual organization that we are sort of pre-programmed in a way to see things in certain ways, but they sometimes can confuse us. Okay, even when we know something is an illusion, looking at it, we cannot unsee it. So that's some of the items that we talked about during our particular session last class. So that sets the stage for our continuation on our conversation of sensation and perception, part 2. So continuing our investigation into vision, we're going to be looking at such things as depth perception as well as monocular cues. So when we look at this activity, this test called the visual cliff, what we're doing with this young person here, this infant, is testing whether or not they have obtained depth perception. Think about it. Usually you start crawling around 8 or 9 or so months, and they're crawling. They're mobile now. And so what we see is, as a safety measure, it would seem, around that same time, we see them develop depth perception as well as a fear of falling. So what would happen is, and this is what this test is trying to see, if we have some figure which they would like to hug, for example, the woman we see on the right here, and the baby is put down on the far end of this particular object, it will want to crawl to get a hug. So they have it such that they can keep crawling, but will they notice that there's an edge there? Will they notice that there's depth there? And normally they will, and they will stop crawling, because if they continue crawling, they will fall off. So even newborn animals fear the perceived cliff. So it is something that is somewhat ingrained in us to an extent. Now, unlike other animals, humans have 2 eyes in front of our head. Now, note this. I mean, I don't know if you've paid attention enough, but a lot of animals, their eyes are sort of more on either side. But for us, we have dead center in front. 2 eyes in front of our head. This gives us retinal disparity. The 2 eyes always have a slightly different view of what they're looking at. So the more different the views are, the closer the object must be. So if you hold your finger out at the very length of your arm and then bring it in as your eyes are focusing on it, you'll see they get really close. The disparity, open one and close the other, you'll see it shifts quite a bit. So that gives us some idea of distance. This is used in 3D movies to create the illusion of depth, as each eye gets a different view of, quote, close objects. And so what they do sometimes is they'll give you glasses that will sort of shift your view, aiding this retinal disparity, so that you get a little shift, and that gives your brain the information that says these things have some depth to them, that they are, for example, further away. So how do we perceive depth from a 2D image? By using monocular, needing only one eye, cues. And we can do that too. So we don't require both eyes in order to ascertain depth. Okay, it's much easier in many ways, but we can get the same type of information about depth based on one eye or monocular cues. Here are a few here. We start off with interposition. When one object appears to block the view of another, we assume that the blocking object is in position between our eyes in the blocked object. So if we can go way back when you had teachers teaching up in front of the classroom behind a lectern, for example, and you could only see their torso and their head, but the stomach, abdomen area all the way to the legs were unseen, you would say the lectern is in front of the instructor. That is interposition. That the lectern is blocking the part of the instructor, therefore it is closer to you than the instructor is. The instructor is on the other side of it. So that is the basics of interposition. It's just saying something is blocking something else. That thing that is being blocked is further away than the thing that is doing the blocking. Then we have relative size. Relative size. If we see the picture on the right, we see these huge flowers in front of us. We're not going to suggest that these huge flowers are gigantic versions of all the other flowers. We're going to perceive that no, those flowers happen to be closer to us. Okay, so we intuitively know to interpret familiar objects of a known size as further away when they appear smaller. So as we look further back in the photograph on the right here, we say they are further away because we know what the size of flowers are. And the ones closer to us, they are closer to us. That's why they appear larger than the ones in the back. The cartoon on the other side too gives a similar example. As the cartoon reads here, I have no depth perception. Is there a cop standing on the corner, or do you have a tiny person in your hair? So we know what size that people are and cops are, and so the idea is that we intuitively understand and make that leap. This is also one that you are probably familiar with as well. This is linear perspective and interposition. Okay, so the flowers in the distance seem further away because the rows converge. You know, probably remember all the way back to kindergarten, or at least first or second grade, when you were drawing for class and you got your crayon and you drew these two lines, but the two lines were not totally parallel. They seemed to get closer and closer and closer the further you drew onto the page. That is linear perspective. We always will assume that as they get closer and closer, they're getting further and further away. That's how we drew rows and paths, okay, to do that by having the lines get closer and closer to one another. So that's what we see here, the simple idea of linear perspective giving us the sense of distance. We also see here interposition. If we look down at the flowers at the bottom here, some of those flowers are blocking some of the flowers behind them. Again, that gives us the sense of distance as well, and that is all about depth perception. It tells us how far away something may be from us. Now let me give you another quick example here. Tricks using linear perspective. These two red lines meet the retina as being the same size. However, our perception of distance affects our perception of length. So let me make sure I'm clear here. These two red lines are the same size. Let me ask you now, do you agree with me that the two red lines that we see are the same size, or do you see them as different sizes? Question to you.
I see them as different sizes.
Okay, so the idea here is that there's something referred to as the Ponzo illusion. Okay, one bar is made larger because of the linear perspective that we have to deal with. Okay, so with linear perspective, it sort of changes the way our perception of things can occur. Now, again, don't get me wrong, we're really good at what it is that we do going about our day-to-day activity, perceiving and understanding all the stuff around us. But sometimes they'll sort of like be a little bit glitches in a sense because things are not always as they appear. They're somewhat of an illusion to us. But again, most of the time, it really does not affect us at all. We can go through our life and our day-to-day activities not being greatly influenced by this. In fact, I will assume that even though you've just seen this activity, it's not going to destroy your world. Okay, it's just going to be an interesting curiosity that we now understand as we get to understand how we perceive things and things of that nature. So we have these other molecular cues of relative height. Okay, we tend to perceive the higher part of a scene as further away. Higher in the scene, it's further away from us. This scene can look like layers of buildings with the highest part of the picture as the sky. If we flip the picture like we just did here, then the black part can seem like a night sky because it is now highest in the picture. So again, our perceptions can be tweaked and modified to some degree by what types of sensations are being provided to us. A couple of others. Molecular cues, the shading effects. Shading helps our perception of depth. And of course, many of you who are painters or artists probably are very, very familiar with these ideas, because that's how you make things appear the way you want them as you're doing your drawings or painting your paintings. So shading helps us our perception of depth. Does the middle circle bulge out or inward? All right, so that appears to bulge inward, and then we shaded it slightly differently. We have it bulging out. So again, shading, okay, along with relative height and linear perspective can all have some great deal of impact on what we are perceiving. Light and shadow create depths as well. So we see a variety of things out there, and it sort of helps us to understand that as we go through our day-to-day activities, lots of things are being bombarded at us, and we are perceiving things, but they're not always going to be perceptions which are really the way things actually are. You've heard it before. What perception is reality. Your perception is reality. In a sense, that's what it is. It may not be exactly what we're actually out there with in the environment. One that you're probably familiar with too is motion parallax. When moving closer objects appear to move in the opposite direction, and further objects don't seem to move so fast. So if we are in a vehicle or moving rather fast, we can see objects and cars swoosh past us, but things which are further away, they don't move as fast that way. All right, so when we are moving, we can tell which objects are further away because it takes longer to pass them. So we're in a vehicle or a train, we see a plane off in the distance in the sky. That plane seems to just hang there for a long time. But things which are closer to us seem to zip behind us, going in the opposite direction. So a picture of a moon on a sign would zip behind us, but the actual moon is too far for us to pass. So we get these ideas of relative motion. Even if you're sitting like stationary on a stage in some sort of theater, and they have something behind you like a big screen, and the screen is showing cars and movement, you'll get the perception that you are moving. Okay, but the idea, these are just illusions, they're not happening. I mean, even anytime you go to a movie, it is in a way an illusion that you're seeing. You're not actually seeing people move on the big movie screen. You're seeing a bunch of still photographs, in a sense, that are being shown rather rapidly, one after the next, to give you the illusion of a movement. And that's basically the phi phenomenon that some of you may have heard of before as well. So there are many things that we come into contact with that are not exactly as they seem, but also psychology tries to make us understand why these things occur. I'm going to pause there real quickly to see if there are any questions or comments at this time. All right. I made a mistake here. I just need to grab me something to drink real quick. I'll be back shortly. Hold up. It'll be less than 40 seconds. Okay, sorry about that. I was about ready to choke there. Okay, so now we're going to start off with looking at another aspect of vision, perceptual constancies. So what are perceptual constancy? First, our ability to see objects as appearing the same, even under different lighting conditions, at different distances and angles. It's called this perceptual constancy. And it is a form of sort of a top-down process. We have examples of color and brightness constancy, shape and size constancy. The idea, we don't want them We don't want to get confused by things which we sort of already know should be the same. They shouldn't change. So we take context, etc., into consideration of our perception. So here is an example of color constancy. This ability to see a consistent color and changing illumination, that's lighting, helps us to see the three sides as all being yellow because our brain compensates for the shading. As a result, we interpret three same color blue dots with shades that are not adjusted for shading as being of three different colors. But as we will see, that is not the case. Brightness constancy. On this screen, the squares A and B are exactly the same shade of gray. A and B. You can see this when you connect them like so. So why does B look lighter? So basically it comes to some things like this. Our brain compensates for shadows and other contexts by perceiving a constant color, shade, and brightness, even when things are in shadow. This means mentally erasing the shadow to see objects in a lighter shade. This process, plus the checkerboard context, makes B seem lighter to our brain than the images sensed by our eyes. So again, how we know and how we see the world is going to be determined about what our mind, our brain is doing. Sometimes, I mean, without our control over it per se, therefore we do not always see things the way they actually are. Then we have shape constancy. Shape constancy refers to the ability to perceive objects as having a constant shape despite receiving different sensory images. This helps us to see the door as a rectangle as it opens. Because of this, we may think the red shapes on the screen are also rectangles. So that's what we're really seeing. We're always going to see it as a door, but what we're really seeing is sort of a changing, shifting object that's more akin to a trapezoid of some sort. So the idea is that we maintain these things as being constant, okay, even though they may not truly appear that way, but it makes our life, I guess, a little bit more understandable and reasonable for us to get into our day-to-day activities. Now, this is another aspect of size constancy. We saw this mentioned previously, but with size constancy here, we have the following. We have an ability to use distance-related context cues to help us see objects as the same size, even if the image on the retina becomes smaller. The Ames room was invented by American ophthalmologist Albert Ames in 1934. The room was designed to manipulate distance cues to make two same-sized girls appear very different in size. So we will assume that things are what they appear to be, that they are in a room that makes sense. That's what all the indications are. We see a sort of a hand-drawn clock in the back. We see two windows and everything. But the assumptions that we're making are incorrect, that the room is a normally shaped room. Okay, otherwise we would see the actual size relative to each of the girls here. Let's see what it actually does look like. So as you can see in this room, the way it's done, one is pushed much further closer to us. Okay, that's where the young lady with the red jacket is now on this particular slide. And one is pushed further back, but yet the drawings of the windows and everything seem to be lined up so that they appear to be the same size. That's why we get that sort of awe effect when we see something like that. The girls are exactly about the same size. Now, visual interpretation, restored vision, sensory restriction. Experience shapes our visual perception. People have grown up without vision, but then have surgically gained sight in adulthood. They learned to interpret depth, motion, figure ground distinctions, but could not differentiate shapes or even faces. So this tells us that there's probably some sort of critical period that some things uh, have to be functioning for you to be able to do the way most people normally be able to accomplish via their senses as they age. But if you miss out on those opportunities and regain sight later, there may be some deficiencies that you may not be able to overcome. So here, they're able to learn and interpret depth and motion and figure ground distinctions, but could not differentiate shapes or even faces. Animals raised at an early age with restrictions, for example, without seeing horizontal lines, later seem unable to learn to perceive such lines. So there is some idea of a critical time period again that's required for us to take this information in and sort of integrate it into our mental processing when it comes to our ability to sense and perceive. So we must practice our perception skills during a critical period of development, or these skills may not develop. So even though they will be able to obtain some new capabilities when it comes to sensing and perceiving, there may be some things they'll never be able to attain simply because they missed out on a very critical period of development where the practice of perception skills would have been needed. Perceptual adaptation. After our sensory information is distorted, such as by a new pair of glasses or by delayed audio on television, humans may at first be disoriented, but can learn to adjust and function. What this is basically saying is you can get some sort of altering glasses on your head that will flip what you actually should be seeing. For example, this may flip the person to be upside down, so the person looks like they're upside down, and so the person with the goggles tries to shake the guy's hand, but the hand is not where he expects it to be based on the visual information. After a while, despite the early disorientation, human beings are usually going to be able to adjust so that they then can put their hand in the proper place and shake the person's hand. But at least initially, it will be somewhat difficult as you try to orient yourself. So this man could learn eventually to fly an airplane wearing these unusual goggles, but here at first he is disoriented by having this world turn literally upside down from his perspective. All right, so we see these types of things all the time. I remember seeing not too long ago where they put these special glasses on a quarterback in a practice field, and he took the hike, ran back, and then had to learn or adjust or adapt to having those upside down goggles on to try to throw the pass to the proper person down the field, and eventually they did get it. It didn't take too long, actually. So we know that we can figure these things out and adapt to these perceptual types of tricks. Now let's discuss some of the non-visual senses. There's more to sensation and perception than meets the eye. So there are sensations and things out there beyond just hearing, just beyond just seeing, hearing being the next most important one for most of us. Hearing from the sound to ear, perceiving pitch and locating sounds, touch in pain, also a sensation and perception, taste and smell, as well as perception of body position and movement. All right, so let's start off by focusing on hearing, probably the next most important of our abilities to sense the world around us. Okay, when it comes to hearing, how do we take a sensation based on sound waves and turn it into perceptions of music, people, and actions? How do we distinguish among thousands of pitches and voices? So, hearing or auditions, starting with sound. First, we have frequency. It corresponds to our perception of pitch. The length of the sound wave perceived as high and low pitches. We have amplitude, corresponds to our perception of loudness. The height or intensity of the sound wave perceived as loud and soft. Complexity corresponds to our perception of timbre, perceived as sound quality or resonance, from a simple pure tone to a bunch of mixed frequencies. So what are we doing with these sound waves? Well, sound waves reach the ear. So why is the ear shaped so funny? It's designed in order to help trap sound waves and push them down the auditory canal, where we can start to begin the process of preparing them for being understood and getting the meaning out of it. So the outer ear collects sounds and funnels it to the eardrum. In the middle ear, the sound waves hit the eardrum and move the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, usually referred to as the inner bones of the inner ear, the stirrup, in ways that amplify the vibrations. The stirrup then sends these vibrations to the oval window of the cochlea. That's the thing that sort of looks like a snail shell here. All right, so this is where the stirrup attaches, okay, getting the vibrations to be sent into the cochlea. In the inner ear, waves of fluid move from the oval window over the cochlea's hair receptor cells. These cells send signals through the auditory nerve to the temporal lobe of the brain. So what we're seeing here is the process by which transduction will be occurring. So let's look a little bit more closely here at that. So we see the stirrup here and the oval window. The fluid is moving around the basilar membrane that has the hair cells on it. Here's what the hair cells sort of look like here, cochlear hair cells. And as they move, as they bend, they fire a neural impulse, okay, the axons of which form the auditory nerve, which then will go through the process of ultimately getting to the temporal lobe where the information can be processed. Now, a couple of ideas here that I want to make sure you understand, that sometimes we have the inability, or our hearing is not as well tuned as it could be. We can have some sort of hearing loss, which many people are at danger of, and probably a growing number as they listen to music with their earbuds in their ears, but at too loud a noise, which can cause damage long term. We have conduction hearing loss when the middle ear isn't conducting sound well to the cochlea. So it's going to be something that's an issue with the middle ear not getting those sound waves where they need to be. Then we have sensory neural hearing loss when the receptor cells aren't sending messages through the auditory nerves. Okay, with this, you can have more problematic issues that could be hair cells that break, and sound waves or pressure waves, and they can be powerful enough to literally snap hair cells at certain locations, so that you'll never be able to hear that particular frequency again. All right, so here's some decibels is how we measure sound. We can see here the threshold for hearing, 0 decibels, and then the whispers are 20. Normal conversation around 60 or so. We have a busy street around 80, and prolonged exposure above 85 decibels produces hearing loss. So exposure to sounds that are too loud to talk over can cause damage to the inner ear, especially the hair cells. Structures of the middle ear and inner ear can also be damaged by disease or some sort of trauma. Prevention methods include limiting exposure to noises over 85 decibels and treating ear infections. Now, it's one of the senses that we rely on a great deal, but really don't think about it that much. But we do risk a lot of things by having lots of loud noises around all the time, particularly when we do it to ourselves by listening to music that is way louder than it should be. It can be problematic. May not be now, but several years down the road, it can be a major issue that can result in serious hearing loss. So obviously, if you've been to some concerts in your past and stood next to the speakers, you can see that if it's loud enough to start shaking you personally, it's way too loud for your eardrums as well as other sensitive ear systems. Now, in treating hearing loss, people with conductive hearing loss may be helped by hearing aids. These aids, all they're really doing are just amplifying sounds, striking the eardrum, ideally by amplifying only softer sounds or higher frequency. So the earpieces, which are hearing aids that are sometimes visible in someone's ear, they're being somewhat selective about what they're amplifying and then sending on so that the person has a better chance of hearing what's been said in their environment. People with central neural hearing loss can benefit from a cochlear implant. The implant does the work of the hair cells. So this, you have some issues with your hair cells. They implant this cochlear implant there. And it works with the hair cells by translating sound waves into electrical signals to be sent to the brain. So we just replace that system. Sound perception, loudness. Now, so looking at how it is that we're perceiving sound, such as loudness here, it refers to more intense sound vibrations. This causes a greater number, so 1/8 way, a greater number of hair cells to send signals to the brain. So they just send a greater number of signals to sort of give us the perception of loudness. Soft sounds only activate certain hair cells. So softer sounds only will activate certain hair cells. Louder sounds move those hair cells and their neighbors. So what this is really coming down to is that these are ways in which we've determined how we are interpreting loudness. What is the actual process that's going on? And how about soft sounds is the process that seems to be going on as well. So there are a variety of takes as to how these things are accomplished as we hear a variety of sounds with a certain loudness and pitch and tones. So how does the inner ear turn sound frequency into neural frequency? We have place theory. At high sound frequencies, signals are generated at different locations in the cochlea. So when we have a high frequency, it will have a greater impact on different locations within the cochlea, depending on the pitch. The brain reads pitch by reading the location where the signals are coming from. So it's what we refer to as place theory. Where it's being stimulated will be the key thing, and that's how we will interpret that particular high sound frequency. Another one is called frequency theory. At a really low sound frequency, hair cells send signals at whatever rate the sound is received. So low sounds, it's going to send at whatever rate it's being received. And then we have the volley principle. At ultra high frequencies, receptor cells fire in succession, combining signals to reach the higher firing rate. So if there's a high rate of high frequencies, they will fire however many volleys, like 1, 2, 3, however many volleys to get to the equivalent firing rate. So these are a variety of theories that seem to be in place to help us to interpret the pitch of the sounds around us. And then another idea is localization. Well, localization is basically a very important notion. It's about you trying to determine where something is located using sound, all right? You see this all the time in the slasher movies, or someone's being chased and it's totally dark, and so they can only rely on their hearing as to where the perpetrator is that's chasing you. All right, and so you quiet yourself down and you try to hear where the noise is coming from. So how do we seem to know the location of the source of sound? Well, sound usually reaches one of our ears sooner and with more clarity than they reach the other ear. So you're looking for a very small difference. You're looking for one sound in one of your ears is going to be clearer than the other. And this example we see in the graph here, we see the air and the sound molecules going toward this person's right ear. So we can assume that it's going to be a little bit quicker to that ear and a little bit clearer to that ear than to the left ear, where they'll get the shadow of that sound, sort of a muffled version of that sound, and it will be delayed somewhat before that sound gets to that other ear. Now it happens really quickly, but that's usually going to be quick enough for you to get an idea as to where the source of the sound may be coming from. So the brain uses this difference to generate a perception of the direction the sound was coming from. So that is one way that is very understandable, and it makes logical sense for us to be able to determine where something is coming from. Okay, so we use this in order to understand locations, particularly of potential dangers. Now, another thing too, we hear ourselves talk all the time. But I will probably say to all of you, when you hear yourself recorded on a cell phone or any type of recording device, it normally does not sound like you, because it's not the same voice that people hear. They'll say, oh, well, you sound like yourself, but for you, it's very rarely that you hear yourself outside of the confines of your own skull. So we are not always hearing exactly what people are hearing when we speak, and sometimes a little bit off-putting. All right, so that takes care of the key ideas of hearing. Then we talk about the other senses. The other senses, touch, taste, smell, and body position. We don't think about them as much, but obviously life would be much different if we did not have them around. So the other senses, we do not have all the sensory abilities of the shark, such as sensing electromagnetic fields of others, or migratory birds who can detect the Earth's magnetic field. But we do have these senses here, and these senses do provide some needed advantages to us, or at least make life interesting and enjoyable. Touch is valuable for expressing and sensing feelings, for sharing affection, comfort, and support, for detecting the environment in multiple ways, such as pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. And it's that last bullet point that we'll focus on for a minute here. Touch, how when we touch things, there's only certain aspects of touch that we can really feel: pressure, warmth, cold, and pain, and that's it. Everything that we experience is going to be, by way of touch, is going to be some combination of those things. So these are the four components of touch. So stroking it, but also we need to understand this too, by way of example. Stroking adjacent pressure spots creates a tickle. So if we do a little bit of an activity here where we stroke adjacent pressure spots, we create a sense of tickle. Adjacent cold and pressure sensations feel wet. So if you're touching, let's say, a kind of cool outside, and you touch a door knob in just the right way, you'll feel cold, and then you'll feel pressure as well, and then you'll lift your hand up and look at it real quickly because it felt wet to you. Well, that is one of the ways you get that sense of wetness, is because of the cold and pressure hitting your skin in the right way. It will give you the perception of wetness. Adjacent warm and cold feels searing hot. So the notion is, if you have cold and warm water and you hit the pressure just the right way, it seems hot to you. So what we're saying primarily is that the sense of touch, depending on the combinations of these four components, you can get a variety of different types of perceptions or feelings as a result of it. Pain, what is it good for? Well, it is good for a whole bunch of things. As I'm sure we've talked about briefly before, pain is a way of communicating that something's wrong. If we don't get pain, we never know something's wrong, and we can have some major issues as a result of that. So pain tells the body that something has gone wrong. Pain often warns of severe injury, or even just to shift positions in a chair to keep blood flowing. Now, you've been in those classes where it's been a long class. Maybe it's a 3-hour class with a break in it, and you're sitting most of the time. You shift a lot during those classes. because your body is telling you to do so, saying it's giving you information that is uncomfortable, which will allow you to shift a little bit so you can keep the blood flowing properly in your body. But not everyone gets those signals. Not everyone has the benefit of having those painful signals warn us when something is wrong. So not being able to feel pain, as in Ashley's case here, means not being able to tell when you were injured, sick, or causing damage to our bodies. So somebody could have stepped on something in their bare feet, cut themselves, not realize their foot was cut, keep walking, doing whatever they're doing for a couple of days until the foot gets infected. You still don't feel the foot's infection or the pain as it should be there because you can't sense pain. So these individuals usually have a tough life, and they can die from a variety of ailments because their body is not providing them one of their key duties, which is to warn the individual, the person, of injury so that something can be taken care of so greater damage doesn't result. So there are people out there who just do not have the ability to sense this pain, but it's not really good for them because pain, believe it or not, is your friend. It gives you and provides you with some valuable information about the state of your body. So there are biological factors in pain perception. We have the pain circuit. We have these nociceptors, or sensory receptors, whose signals are interpreted by the brain as pain. So the pain circuit refers to signals that travel to the spinal cord up through small nerve fibers, which then conduct pain signals to the brain. So it goes from this big toe injury on the pin there, goes up, okay, goes to the spinal cord where it does its thing there, and then goes up to the brain where we will experience the pain. So again, pain, valuable. We don't like going through it, but it's like the ultimate check system, okay, that it makes sure everything's going okay. And when something's not going okay, that's when pain should result. It can be any type of pain. Sometimes we have what you may have heard of as referred pain. You may hurt someplace where it has nothing to do with what the real issue is, but your body just simply trying to tell you in some way that there is something serious going on, and that's why we experience pain, to tell us that. Now, biological factors in pain, we have the gate control theory. This theory hypothesizes that the spinal cord contains a neurological gate that blocks pain signals or allows them to pass on to the brain. Stimulating large nerve fibers in the spinal cord through acupuncture, massage, or electrical stimulation seems to close that gate. So there are certain types of things that we know how to do in order to eliminate or curtail that pain. Then we talk about endorphins, which we've mentioned several times already in the course. These hormones can be released by the body to reduce pain perception. So if the body has some sort of alarm going on, so to speak, and it says, yes, we are experiencing pain there, then endorphins are going to be released. And again, this is your body's own chemical drug factory, and it's reducing this to try to help you deal with pain. And then there's phantom limb sensation, as the brain produces false sounds like tinnitus or ear ringing, sights or auras and lights. And with migraines, it can produce pain or other perception of amputated or missing arms or legs. So it can still act as if something is there when actually it's not. We still feel the pain of it. Okay. All right. So what we see here is a variable powerful thing when it comes to how we deal with pain. But if you've ever been in this situation, I know a couple people have, where they do something really unfortunate. Let's say someone just running around the bases on a practice game for baseball, they fall and they break their leg, and maybe a little bit of their leg is protruding out. You hear these tales about the person is sitting there seeing that a little bit of their bone is sticking out of their leg, and there's this time frame where they're really not in that much pain until it hits later. It's almost as if sometimes when something really serious happens, the pain does not kick in immediately. It just gives you a little bit of a grace period where you say, oh, something just bad happened, and maybe allow you an opportunity to do something, try to save something or another. But that's the basic idea, that these things can happen that way. A very traumatic type of thing, you realize it there, it feels somewhat surreal, but at the same time, the pain will come. It just may not come or arrive yet. Now, other factors do influence our pain as well. Uh, we've seen this before. Uh, Distraction is a key one, such as during intense athletic competition, it can limit the experience of pain. Somebody could be playing with a broken toe or broken foot or something in some sort of athletic event, but they're so distracted they don't experience the pain at all. Then there's pain and memory. Memories of pain focus on peak moments more than duration. So you can remember the peak of that pain, but not how long it actually lasted. Tapered pain is recalled as less painful than abruptly ended pain. So as the pain gets less and less and less, so like you're being weaned off experiencing the pain, you will not remember that pain as much as when the pain is abruptly ended. Now, people have talked about this too. While a female may give birth to a kid, it can be painful, it can be a really, really tough time, and they'll be screaming and all this type of stuff. But the idea is that why do they go through it again? Well, some say they don't have the same memory of the pain, okay, particularly its duration, maybe the peak moments, but not its duration. So in some instances, we see there are going to be psychological influences on how we experience our pain, particularly pain in memory. Okay. Also, when it comes to distraction, sometimes people will rub their belly to try to get their focus away from something that is causing pain. You do something to try to distract yourself so that you're not sort of wallowing in the pain. You're not letting it sort of get all around you, so you can be distracted from the experience of the pain itself. There are also going to be social and cultural influences on pain perception as well. We have social contagion. We feel more pain if other people are experiencing pain. This occurs either out of empathy or mirroring, or a shared belief that an experience is painful. So pain can spread, or misery can spread, so to speak. Cultural influences. We may not pay attention as much to pain if we see a high level of pain endurance as the norm of our family, peer group, or culture. So what this is basically saying is, if your family or the culture where you live, people do not display their pain, they don't cry and publicly, they don't wince in pain or show that they're in agony, then you have been conditioned or trained that you're part of that culture too. You'll probably act in a way that is normal for that particular culture or for a family. Some families don't share pain. They go about stiff upper lip and all. But the idea is that these things will influence your pain perception. Okay, so this early factors will have a play. Controlling and managing and reducing pain. Pain can be reduced through drugs, acupuncture, electrical stimulation, exercise, hypnosis, all these things that we've seen before. We can see that we can reduce our pain. Even the placebo effect has a real influence on pain perception. When we think we are taking the painkillers or receiving acupuncture, our bodies can release endorphins. So if you think you are taking something that will relieve your pain, if you can convince your body to release more endorphins, then you are really treating yourself in a sense. Distraction with virtual reality immersion below that we see here has helped burn victims manage intense pain as well. So there are a variety of ways in which we can see the experience of pain can be curtailed, controlled, managed, or reduced in some fashion. So looking at the levels of analysis here quickly, we have the biopsychosocial social influences on pain perception. Okay, the biological going to be activity of the brain, spinal cord, large and small fibers, genetic differences in endorphin production. Some psychological is going to be your attention to pain, learning based on experiences or expectations. Social culture, will others be around? Will there be empathies for others' pain or cultural expectations? Again, if you are on a football field, and let's say we're talking about men playing football, for example, and someone gets hit really hard, or something happens, uh, normally, depending on the circumstances, they'll try to sort of walk it off because the culture may indicate that that's what would be expected when you're in this particular type of situation. You don't sit, hold your arm, and start crying. That's not what would be expected or seen as norm as part of the culture of playing football. All right. Now, the last few are going to be looking at some other senses, some of which you have some greater understanding of or experience of. Let's look at taste. Our tongues have receptors for 5 different types of taste, each of which may have had a survival function in the past. I mean, why do we have these tastes? Because the taste to our ancestors used to tell us something of a potential danger. So let's start to the upper right here. Bitter used to be able to tell us, we believe, of things that may be potential poisons. Salty, sodium essential to physiological process, meaning that we required salt, so we look for that. Umami, or savoriness, proteins grow and repair tissue. So it tastes that way. It seems to help us grow and repair tissue. Sour, potentially toxic acid. And sweet, an energy source. So again, what we see here are why we may have these tastes from an evolutionary point of view. They helped us to survive in the past, and we still maintain them into today. Now, the neurochemistry of taste. There are no regions of the tongue, just different types of taste receptor cells projecting hairs into each taste bud's pore. These cells are easily triggered to send messages to the temporal lobe of the brain. When you burn your tongue, which has happened from time to time, receptors reproduce every week or two, but with age, we do see taste buds become less numerous and less sensitive. We do see that, and that's probably why you see your aging parent or grandparent tends to put a little bit more salt and pepper or hot sauce on things, because their receptors cells are not as numerous as they were when they're much younger. And then top-down processes still can override the neurochemistry expectations do influence taste. So we do know that we can sort of override some of this neurochemistry stuff we're talking about here simply by what we expect of the things that we're tasting. Okay. One other thing I want to add about tasting. I might add it here. Let me go through smell first. The idea is that when you taste something, our taste is probably not as sophisticated as you probably think it is. In fact, oftentimes our taste, when we say that tastes really great, may not just be the taste alone. It's also most likely going to involve our sense of smell. Okay, now smell, we have our odor receptors. Humans have a poor sense of smell for an animal. Even so, humans have about 350 different types of smell receptors, allowing us to detect about 10,000 different types of odors. So what we have here, we have odorants bind to receptors. So we have stuff in the air, we bring them in through the nose. Okay, they bind with our receptors. The olfactory receptor cells are activated and sends electrical signals. Okay, the signals are relayed via converged axons here, and see in step 3. Step 4, the signals are then transmitted to higher regions of the brain. All right, now where does it go? Well, the smell takes a sort of a shortcut sense because it does something a little bit different than the rest. Sensations of smell take a shortcut to the brain, skipping the trip through the sensory switchboard or the router of the thalamus made by all the other senses. So everyone else goes to the thalamus except for this guy. This guy bypasses going to the thalamus. Information from the nose goes not only to the temporal lobe, but also to the limbic system. So it goes straight to the temporal lobe, but also to the limbic system, which we talked about previously. And in the limbic system, there are structures there that aid and influence our memory as well as our emotion. So what that means, as you smell something, smells can be linked to emotional things and to memories. So smell links lovers, parent and child, and other creatures to each other through chemistry. So that is why you save someone's shirt that still has the odor of that special someone who's now traveling for a while or deployed or something. Because the smell, as long as it lingers, it ties it to memories and the emotions tied to that individual, makes them more vivid. That is why smell is so powerful at doing that particular type of thing, of causing people to have certain memories reemerge or to have certain emotions as well. Then we have sensing body position and movement. Kinesthesis is movement feeling, sensing the movement and position of the individual body parts relative to each other. How it works, there are sensors in the joints and muscles, and they send signals that coordinate with signals from the skin, eyes, and ears. Without kinesthesis, we would need to watch our limbs constantly to coordinate movement. So you don't have to watch yourself as you're walking upstairs. Okay, you can coordinate all this type of stuff more smoothly because at a level, you know where your feet are, you know where your arms are. If you're doing any type of athletic event or activity, you're running all out, you need to know where your body parts are, what they're doing, how fast they're doing. That helps with the coordination of the entire system. So the kinesthesis is basically the idea that we get this information that's going to be very valuable to you. A few years back, I was on some medicine that gave me some neuropathy at my feet, meaning I could not get feedback from my feet, and I did not realize where my feet were all the time. And I wound up walking all the time, in the hallway, minding my own business, so to speak. And all of a sudden, I would bump into something. I just walked into a wall. I wasn't getting the proper feedback to make the proper adjustments, and it became a whole thing. But the idea is that feedback from our body parts is very key to the smooth functioning and coordination of the body part as they're moving in particular. So we have the vestibular sense, is the ability to sense the position of the head and body relative to gravity, including the sense of balance. As you can see, the gentleman on the right here, without their vestibular sense working properly, they could not do that, period. Okay, they have to know where they are, where their body parts are, as well as balance is going to be very key to doing that type of physical stunts. So how it works, we have these fluid-filled chambers in the inner ear, the vestibular sacs and semicircular canals. They have these hair-like receptors that send messages about the head's position to the cerebellum. The vestibular sense serves as the human gyroscope, helping us to balance and to stay up straight. Now, obviously, when things are going on, if you have flus or head cold or some inner ear infection, these things can get out of whack. That's when we'll experience things like vertigo, where we don't seem like we can balance. We seem unsteady on our feet because our system, our vestibular sense, is sort of out of whack. And there's nothing you can do to walk straight or stand up correctly because the system itself that helps to determine, your balance and all that type of stuff is sort of glitched up at the moment. So mixing the different senses together, sensory interaction occurs when different senses influence each other. For example, a burst of sound makes a dim light source more visible. Flavor is an experience not only of taste, but also of smell and texture. Let me give you a really quick example. If you have someone cut up an apple into a square cube with a toothpick in it, and you have somebody cut up a potato as a square cube too and put a toothpick in it, and you give them to someone to taste, if you close their nose up, close it up like with a clothespin or some other type of pincing device, and tell them to taste it, they will be of similar textures. And normally, without the sense of smell, you would not be able to distinguish which was the cube of an apple and which was a cube of a potato, because our sense of smell is so integrated, intertwined with our sense of taste, it's hard for us to separate it. That is why let's say you love lasagna as one of your favorite dishes. That is why when you have an allergy or a head cold and someone fixes your favorite dish for yourself, for you, and you taste it, it doesn't taste right because your smell is so messed up. Your taste buds rely a little bit on the smell to give you the full perception of what you love about that lasagna. All right, seeing text or lip movement or even feeling the puff of air from consonants affects what words we hear. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Synesthesia is the condition when perception in one sense is triggered by a sensation in a different sense. Some people experience synesthesia all the time, reporting that the number 7 gives them a salty taste, or rock music seems purple. So sometimes these things do happen and mix things up to some extent. Now, the other last few ideas I want to cover is one that is something that I talk about in one of my other classes, and that's going to be embodied cognition. And another one we'll end up with is going to be looking at ESP. So we got the last few minutes here of class. We'll do that now. Now, embodied cognition. It's no coincidence that we use sensation words to describe feelings. Studies seem to show that holding a warm mug promotes social warmth. Social rejection looks like pain reception in the brain. Words on a heavy clipboard seem weighty. Being ignored, given the cold shoulder, makes a room seem colder. Leaning left physically, leaning left politically. In a foul-smelling room, people were more likely to suspect bad intentions or foul play by others. So what we mean by embodied cognition, it refers to the effect of body experience on feelings, attitudes, thoughts, and judgments. Sometimes people will say things like this: I feel it in my gut. All right. You feel that you need to do something in your gut. Like that's where you're thinking about it, in your gut. Sometimes, including myself, this has been different for me over this last few years here, is that when you talk or communicate with people, some people like to move their hands all the time. Or if you remember when you were in classes, the instructors sometimes, some of them, like myself, have to walk back and forth, pace a lot. It helps us to think and to process information. So that's embodied cognition, that some part of our thought process seems to be tied to our body in some way. All right, so that is one of the last things I want to cover. The other one is going to be ESP. Because we're talking about sensory sensation and perception here, let's talk about this other idea of perception called extrasensory perception. And extrasensory perception, or ESP, can be defined literally as perception without sensation. You have perception, but there is no sensation tied to that particular perception. Believers in ESP think it involves getting accurate information directly to the mind, skipping the known senses. The types of ESP include, I'm sure you've seen this in TV and movies and novels you may have read. We have telepathy, reading messages from other minds, clairvoyance, seeing remote events. You're not presently there, but you can see something that's happening 1,000 miles away, for example. Precognition, knowing the future, knowing that something's going to happen at such and such time on such and such day, and knowing that this is something that's going to happen. So you're predicting, precognition. So the evidence for ESP is anecdotal at best and very controversial. People seem to notice things when predictions come true and perceptions match reality, but tend to disregard the times when they do not. For example, part of this whole thing would be things like the horoscope, where you have your astrological sign, look at what your day's supposed to be like. Generally, the terms are very vague that can fit lots of people. And so let's say today your horoscope fit exactly what happened to you today. Now, the issue is this. You are more likely to remember that, oh my God, it was on target today. The horoscope was exactly what happened, what I felt today. The problem is, as you look back on this event, you'll forget the 364 times that year that it did not at all, but you will remember the time it did. And therefore, you sort of like have a biased perception of what has gone on. So right now, there may be something out there. There may be something to ESP, but with our science today, we've yet to be able to determine any evidence of it. Okay, so those are the key things I want to make sure we covered for today. As I wrap things up, just want to remember some of the things that we've talked about so far the last couple of sessions: vision, hearing, touch, taste, smell, position movement of body parts, and position movement of our head. Each one of these has some sort of physiological thing as part of our body that helps certain types of receptor cells get information about stimuli in the environment through vision, hearing, or where we are, where our body's located, so that it can be processed by our brain so that we can make the appropriate actions and take the appropriate responses that are necessary to make sure that we can survive. One of the key things I want to make sure I emphasize here before we get out of here is that all these activities are very important to our survival. We want to be able to sense our environment, what's around us, what's going on, because there could be potential dangers out there. So we want to be able to sense it. Then we want to be able to take that sensation and perceive what it means. Perception. Okay, we sense something, we understand it now through our perception, and then the brain can make some determinations as to whether or not it's dangerous or not, and then send down the appropriate responses to it. So we sense, we perceive, and then we respond appropriately. Therefore, we survive. That's the key thing here. We do all this type of stuff in order to aid in our survival. Even when we have some pain in our left side, when we go to the doctor, we tell them about the pain. That pain warned us of some potential danger. And now you go to your doctor, maybe they can do something about it, find out what's going on, and prevent something even more dangerous happening. So that's how these things work together. The senses are there so that we have perception. Perception is there so that we can process things properly and make the appropriate decisions so that we can survive. Okay, one other thing I want to tell you before we get out of here. That's it for today. I've had a couple people ask me if we have a midterm. We don't have an official midterm, but what I will be doing this semester is providing you with a little midterm activity. It'll be around 20, 25 questions or so. It's going to be just an assignment. It's not going to be as much as a test. You should take it that way. It'll give you some idea of how much information that you're retaining from the course. So far, have covered chapters 1 through 6, being 6 today. So I'll send you some more information about that a little bit later today. If there's nothing else for you guys that you have of me, you guys are free to skedaddle, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.